So welcome everyone to class number 3 of the Diamond Sutra, the true activity of the Bodhisattva. And glad to see you all again this evening. So what I'd like to do is pick up where we left off, unless there are any specific questions before that. Any questions about the email that I sent out or anything about the homework? Otherwise, we can pick up where we left off, which is the end of chapter 3. Yeah. So I'm reading from the 3 translations version, and I'm going to put that up on screen for a moment so we can have a look at that tonight, because we'll be dealing with the language tonight a bit. And so we're here in this section, section 3. I'm going to read from the Thich Nhat Hanh. That's this middle one there. So the Buddha said to Subhuti, "This is how the Bodhisattva Mahasattvas master their thinking. However many species of living beings there are, whether born from eggs, from the womb, from moisture, or spontaneously, whether they have form or do not have form, whether they have perceptions or do not have perceptions, or whether it cannot be said of them that they have perceptions or that they do not have perceptions. We must, or I must, bodhisattvas must lead all these beings to the ultimate nirvana so that they can be liberated. And when this innumerable, immeasurable, infinite number of beings has become liberated, we do not in truth think that a single being has been liberated. Why is this so? If Subhuti, a bodhisattva, holds on to the idea that a self, a person, a living being, or a lifespan exists, that person is not an authentic bodhisattva." So last time we talked quite a bit about the different kinds of beings and what we mean by nirvana. Right. So I won't go much further into that. But then there was the question of liberation. What does it mean? What do we mean by liberation? So as I said in the email, so liberation in this context, in a typical Mahayana context, means freedom from appearances. It means freedom from the 3 poisons of greed, hate, and delusion. And that brings a certain kind of peace of mind. It brings the ability to deal with the turns and twists of dukkha in this life, because actually, or rather I should say, the turns and twists of karma in this life, because then dukkha would be extinguished at liberation. Because there is said to be 2 kinds of nirvana, and the kind of nirvana that one would enter at the time of enlightenment, such as Shakyamuni Buddha did, would be the kind of nirvana with remainder. And what that means is, although there's no new karma that develops, there's no suffering due to the conditions of one's life, the results of past karma have to continue to play out. And therefore, that's why, for example, the Buddha experienced the pains of dying. This was considered to be part of his karma, the final part of his karma. So, to go back to the text, so this innumerable, infinite number of beings when this innumerable, infinite number of beings has become liberated, one does not in truth think that a single being has been liberated. Or as Kanze says, although innumerable beings have thus been led to nirvana, no being at all has been led to nirvana. So this gets into the question of the doctrine of no self. Right? So fundamentally, in order to be able to be on the Bodhisattva path, we have to understand the emptiness of all things, including beings, human beings and other beings. So Nagarjuna referred to this state as dependently arisen mere appearances. That is to say that because of the constant flux of conditions resolving themselves, and each moment you could say a complete resolution of all of the conditions that are present, as well as the results of all the past and the potential for all the future in each instant, right? So that is not negated. The physical world and the mental experience is not negated. That's happening. But it's happening in such a way that we can't really put our finger on it, right? It's just this activity of things happening. So if you think of the kind of example that I like to use sometimes is a compost. So you take a flower and you put a flower, and at what point does the flower become the compost? And then once the compost is generated, then you spread it out there on the ground, and then at one point does it become a flower? And is the new flower the same flower as the old flower? No, it's not the same. And yet it is this transformation that's happening. Okay, so this is one way to think about it. So in order to be, and the point of this end of chapter 3 is one cannot be a bodhisattva without this view. That is to say, that's the only appropriate view, that's the only right view, for one. But also, in order to have the generosity and the courage that's necessary to be a bodhisattva, we have to be able to see the world this way. If you always saw the world as yourself separate from other beings and helping other beings, it's impossible. You get exhausted, you get overwhelmed. So to the extent that you're able to see the interconnectedness of all things, which is required in order for this kind of dependent, immediate arising, then that helps you to be able to have the courage, the generosity, the energy that's needed to actually practice the 6 paramitas. And I'm going to talk a little bit later about the 6 paramitas. So this idea of the no perception of a being is really pointing us at the inseparability of all things. Okay? So it's something of a reductionist view, if you will. It's reducing our view to all things as conditions, like an atomic view almost of conditions. That's why there's this metaphor that's often used, the number of grains of sand in the Ganges. If you think of each one of those grains of sand as a condition, as a being, or as a condition, a being even breaks down further, right, into a condition. And a condition breaks down further into atoms or neutrons or whatever level of detail you'd like to visit it at, right? So it's this view of the sameness, treating all of the conditions of our life as equal. That's what the absolute does, without any kind of dualism about good or bad, or near or far, or self or other, or any of this kind of thing. So it's simply, then what happens is, then you start to see how what we're talking about is actual activity, more so even than the physical things. It's the activity itself that is the being or the thing or the lamp or whatever it is. So in that way, we also refer to usually Buddha nature as activity, or what used to be called the original function. It's often referred to in the Chinese text as original function. Or sometimes in this sutra, the suchness of things. Yeah, this is the suchness of things. Or, and I'm just going to keep throwing out examples because each person will kind of click with one or another one of them. In Uji, right, in his fascicle, Shobogenzo Uji, his fascicle on the time being, Dogen refers to this as the world worlding the world. The world worlding the world. So conditions respond to each other, fully resolve, full of potential, full of the results of the past, all of that instantaneously, each instant, so quickly that we cannot put a finger on it, really. And that creates a certain kind of awareness. And this is the great mystery. This is the great mystery that Zen is pointing to. So this awareness is like, who is it that knows that you're distracted when you're sitting Zazen? That awareness is a function of the great activity. Okay? So when we see beings from that perspective, then beings are naturally liberated, meaning they are naturally free of suffering, right? Because at the level of the absolute, again, there isn't any kind of valence to any of it. So when we attain liberation, and this sutra will tell us over and over again, when you attain liberation, what you attain is the knowledge of that, the knowledge that the suffering isn't inherent in the conditions. Okay. So I'll stop there and we'll take some questions about the last bit of chapter 3 then, or comments or... Sorry, Cynthia, you said something. So.
Oh, well, I was just saying that it's really not being attached to any concepts. In fact, in the next 2 chapters, he goes on to say, don't rely on any concept and don't distinguish things by signs. Mm-hmm. And I think signs and concepts are that dualism, that living in that dualistic reality. And he's telling us that that's really part of the illusion of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that yes.
Yeah.
That's right.
That interconnectedness, the inner being that Thich Nhat Hanh talks about, is once you experience Zazen to that level where like Dogen says, the mind and body drop away, then you sense that connection. And to me, that's the connection that one is trying to maintain outside of sitting Zazen. That's in your walking and your standing and your lying down Zazen. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Maintain that, and that your responses to your life change because of that new awareness.
Yes, that's right. Sensing that kind of connection and being able to maintain it on and off the cushion.
Yeah.
Definitely. That's definitely part of the Bodhisattva practice.
Can I just add one thing, sorry, just quickly, that,
Sure.
you know, the thing that Thich Nhat Hanh also said is that, you know, emptiness is no self. I mean, there is no ego in the experience of emptiness. So again, that's the thing that I find a lot of folks have the most difficulty giving up, that sense of ego, and realizing that that's like really something that keeps you from being liberated, that keeps you locked into a typical perception of what's going on in life.
Mm-hmm. Yes, well, definitely this idea, when Dogen refers to dropping off body and mind, or Ru Jing said body and mind dropped off, right, independent of this kind of I did it.
Yes, right.
This is the non-separation.
Yeah.
That's really what that's about.
And that's Zazen, right?
That is Zazen, yes.
Okay.
Yes. Whether we're aware of it or not, actually, right? This is,
well, we're describing
part
with
of
language, but that's part of what you know, you just carefully choose your words. But I think one always has to know one's speaking in language about a completely unexplainable experience of the absolute. I mean, how do you explain the absolute? I mean, you know what I mean? But we
we're
need
going
to
to
be able
try.
to communicate with each other. I know, but so we need to be able to communicate with each other. And so that I find it good to practice with other people to try and figure out, how do you describe these experiences to other people,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
without getting locked into the words. So
yes. Well, we'll explore that, because that's part of the complexity of the language, is due to trying to actually point at the inconceivable.
Yeah, and I think that's part of the jewel of the practice with a Sangha, is that you have a group of people that kind of understand, or they get the sensation and the fascination with what's going on, and yet we're all trying to explain it to each other or share it with each other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and it becomes tricky, but I think it's good to practice together that way.
Mm-hmm. Definitely. That's part of the exploration, right? It's that kind of mirroring, that kind of Sangha mirroring.
Yeah.
Okay, well, good. And then, unless there's anything more about chapter 3, we're going to go on. Okay.
Good.
So, chapter 4, whose title is The Wonderful Practice of No Attachment. Okay? Chapter 4. So I'm going to read from the Kanze. Moreover, Subhuti, a bodhisattva who gives a gift should not be supported by a thing, nor should be he or she or it or they supported anywhere. When one gives gifts, one should not be supported by sight objects, nor by sounds, smells, tastes, touchables, or mind objects. For Subhuti, the bodhisattva, the great being, should give gifts in such a way that they are not supported by the notion of a sign. So let's talk about that for a moment. So giving, it begins by talking about giving a gift. So this is the first of the 6 paramitas, right? So the 6 paramitas are the practices of the bodhisattva, and the paramitas are dana, which means giving or generosity, shila, which is morality or ethics, kshanti, which means patience or forbearance, or sometimes also persistence, virya, which is vigor or effort, jnana, concentration, or sometimes translated simply as meditation, and prajna, wisdom. Okay? So there are various ways to think about the paramitas as a whole, and the paramitas the way I like to think about them, and might be helpful for this particular sutra, especially, is the first two, Dana and Shila, are about compassion. They're about precepts and about compassion. And the last two are about insight and wisdom. And the middle two, Kshanti and Virya, so patience and effort, are the balancing factors. So those two balance out the effort as a whole, the practice as a whole. But anyway, so this part of the sutra begins by talking about giving, and by extension is teaching the same, is giving the same teaching about all the other 5 paramitas. That's the way that it's typically understood. And for giving in particular, there are usually said to be 3 kinds of giving. So material giving, emotional giving, and dharma. So material giving counteracts greed, meaning bodhisattvas would actually give things like food or like blankets, or Diana Jarrett used to give tarps to homeless people in San Francisco. Blue tarps, that was her thing. Emotional giving is things like talking with people, helping them feel safe and protected. That is said to counteract the poison of hate or anger. And dharma, which is to counteract the poison of delusion. So 3 kinds of giving, 3 to address the 3 poisons.
Greed, hatred, and ignorance.
Yes.
3 poisons.
Greed, hatred, and delusion is usually the way that
Thank you.
I use that 3rd one. You're welcome. So the Buddha demonstrated all of these things in his life, right?
Yeah.
He gave teachings on liberation. He gave teachings on how to have a happy life. He shared the food offerings that he received. He gave emotional to support. The stories of Kisa Gotami and Patachara as very strong examples of that. Women who had lost their family members and were very, very distraught. And also Angulimala is another good story. The serial killer, when he talked...
Oh, Angulimala?
Angulimala, yeah, he talked to Angulimala about, you have to stop what you're doing.
Yeah.
Before he told him any dharma, he said, you have to stop what you're doing.
Yeah.
So this is the Buddha demonstrating these 3 different kinds of giving in his own life. So this this is to say that, so when a bodhisattva practices generosity or practices giving, they should not rely on any object, or red pine says a thing, Kanze says a thing. And Musong has a very interesting commentary on this. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about that. So he translates this sentence this way. He says, furthermore, Subhuti, in the practice of generosity, a bodhisattva should be unsupported. Thus should a bodhisattva practice generosity without being supported by any notion of a sign. So unsupported is this Sanskrit term apratishta, tishtita, aprashtitishta. And he gives Kanze's translation as having about 21 different versions, 21 different definitions. 21? Only 21 for aprashtitishta.
Sounds like Kanze.
Right. And so, but a couple of them that are particularly interesting for us is not relying on anything, not carried away by anything.
Yeah.
Not clinging to anything. Not expecting any help from anything. So this is what we mean by unsupported. And this notion of a sign or a mark or a thing or an object, okay? So this is nimitta. Nimitta. And nimitta, I'm going to mute you guys because I'm hearing some feedback there.
You're getting thunder from me. Sorry.
Oh, okay. That's okay. I'm going to mute you then in that case, Margaret, okay? And you can unmute yourself when you're ready. So this term, a sign or a mark, Musong says it's a technical term for an object of false perception. So it's very interesting. It is, he says, sometimes translated as a defilement. So you might think of it as looking for signs, right? Like something, making something special out of a particular condition that occurs. Okay? Almost like a superstition kind of thing. So what the Buddha is saying is to the Bodhisattva, the Bodhisattva doesn't rely on looking for outward signs to do the right thing, to follow through on their intention. That's basically what this teaching is about. The Bodhisattva practices generosity without looking for some kind of special sign or even some kind of particular result.
And Conan, that makes sense because in the Buddhist time, a lot of people used magic. And I think he was trying to tell people that this isn't a magic. There's nothing magic about this, right? Because he was trying to guide people away from, first of all, thinking that he was a magician, and second, thinking that it took a magician to experience this. Right?
Yeah, that's a good point, definitely. And it ties back also to this concept of mere appearances. If we were seeing the world in terms of conditions as mere appearances, then you don't get hung up on, the color of the sun this morning means something about something else, right?
Right, yes, right.
So as bodhisattvas, what we do take refuge in is Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, right? Yeah. Those are our guideposts.
Right.
Those are our guideposts. And then comes this next part about why. So I'm going to switch to, well, we can stay with the Kansei then. Because the heap of merit of that Bodhi being who, unsupported, gives a gift is not easy to measure. What do you think, Subhuti? Is the extent of space in the east easy to measure? No. In like manner, is it easy to measure the extent in various other directions, all the 10 directions around? No. Just so, the heap of merit of that bodhisattva who unsupported gives a gift is not easy to measure. That is why those who have set out in the bodhisattva vehicle should give gifts without being supported by the notion of a sign. Right? So this word merit comes up, and it's very interesting to notice that Thich Nhat Hanh translates that as happiness.
Yeah, that's interesting, huh?
Yeah, and I wanted to say a few words about that. So basically, if the way I understand it is, Tai is saying positive karma brings joy. Right? If we think of merit as being positive karma in your life brings joy. And certainly the first of the Bodhisattva Bhumi's stages is joy, is bliss. But Pine makes the point, and I tend to agree with him, that merit is something more than good karma. Merit has to do with positive karma that supports liberation specifically. Is a specific type of positive karma. So we have to keep in mind that that's a subjective view, right? That's not from the standpoint of the absolute. That is a subjective view. From the standpoint of the absolute, there's no such thing as merit. There's no such thing as good or bad or any of that stuff. But from the subjective view, then what the implication of that, this is really important, you guys, the implication of that particular piece is selfless activity transforms personal karma. And it transforms personal karma into the realization of the way. So we become an instrument by our selfless activity as bodhisattvas, we become an instrument of the way.
Yeah.
And so our personal karma is equally transformed into an instrument of the way. And that's why it's said that the bodhisattva's merit is boundless.
Yeah.
Right? Because you become part of this greater, immensely vast way.
Yeah.
Part of it in a way of like working with it, like surfing the waves.
Yeah.
So selfless activity transforms personal karma. That's one of the most fundamental teachings of the whole sutra.
Oh, okay, good.
And so just to finish up this last piece of chapter 4 then, there's a sentence here that Thich Nhat Hanh translated that the other two dropped out. And I'm not sure exactly why that happened, but I want to read it here and say something about it because Musong also translated that sentence.
Which one?
He says at the end of chapter 4, Thich Nhat Hanh says, Subhuti, the bodhisattvas should let their minds dwell in the teachings that I have just given.
Yeah.
Or Musong translates it as, Subhuti, a bodhisattva should persevere one-pointedly in this instruction.
Yeah.
So that is the third paramita. That's Kshanti.
Oh.
That is the Buddha pointing at both actually the third and the fourth, Kshanti and Virya, right?
Yeah.
Pointing at patience and effort required here. So apply your patience and your effort, apply your paramitas here to this particular teaching of giving generously without relying on outward signs, and knowing that all things are interconnected. You and all beings are, in the absolute sense, one.
Yeah. Right.
So I'm going to stop there because that's chapter 4 and we can take some questions or comments.
Well, I would say something regarding merit. You know, when Bodhidharma went to China and met with the emperor, and the emperor said, I've built all these wonderful temples and yada yada. And he says, so how much merit do you think that got me? And Bodhidharma says, no merit.
Exactly.
And the emperor kept saying, but I did this, this, and this. And I think Bodhidharma just went, whatever. And he left and went up to the mountains and he just said, whatever. But I mean, that's what people think. It's that, you know, either there's strings attached to a gift, or even the Catholic activity of not absolution, but there's an activity where you can purchase money towards your sins. And the whole notion that the notion that there's a material outcome here and now if you build a church, or if you give money to a temple. And again, that kind of gets back to the signs and the concepts idea, doesn't it?
Yes.
And that's somebody who's not acting in a selfless manner and not giving whatever it is that needs to be given without any questions and no strings attached, kind of.
Well, and to be sure, Bodhidharma was speaking from the absolute when he said to Emperor Wu, he said no merit. And I think we should be careful not to criticize people for being generous for whatever motivation they have. Right?
No.
We're not all going to have the perfect motivation for each thing. So if you're motivated to be generous for perhaps not the ideal reasons, then it's still a beneficial activity to be generous. So
yeah, but I think of like if I give a gift to my sister-in-law for her birthday, but she doesn't send me anything, I work on that. I work in responding to that, to let go of that conditioning notion that she's supposed to give me something back.
Yes.
And to me, that's the Bodhisattva practice, is to really sit with that and release the attachment to that conditioning.
Yes.
And that we all benefit. I'm much happier. She's happy. It's a good thing. It's great. It works.
Great. That's where the joy starts.
Oh, yeah, I guess it is. It really does.
Okay. Anyone else want to say something about chapter 4? Okay, we're going to go on to chapter 5 then. Chapter 5, whose title is The Meaning of Truth and the Appearance of Reality. So Wei Nung, the sixth ancestor, says about the title, when everything one does is true, we call it the appearance of reality. So, chapter 5. So this is the meaty part, you guys. So hang in here with me because we're going to talk language now. So I'm going to read from the Red Pine version. What do you think, Subhuti? Can the Tathagata be seen by means of the possession of attributes? No, indeed, Bhagavan, the Tathagata cannot be seen by means of the possession of attributes. And why not? Bhagavan, what the Tathagata says is the possession of attributes is no possession of attributes. So I'm going to stop there before we go on to it. So, first of all, Tathagata, the thus come one. It is an epithet for the Buddha, the title of the Buddha. It's the way that the Buddha referred to himself most commonly in the Pali texts. And I want us to really think about this as awakened nature. So in the Mahayana, our understanding of Buddha is not just the historical human being who lived 2,550 some years ago, but awakened nature. Okay? So the Buddha asked this question of Subhuti 3 more times in this sutra. So this is really one of the most important questions here, and it's unveiled slightly differently each time. So it's not that it's a repetition, but just to say that this is clearly an important point. So the Tathagata as awakened nature, as well as this historical being, right? If we think about it in that way, then what are these attributes? So the attributes or Kanzi translates them as marks. That's the more common way of the translating that particular term. The marks of the Buddha. There are said to be 32 marks of the Buddha, right? Bodily signs, as Thich Nhat Hanh calls them. They are literally bodily signs, right? The Ushnisha, the big lump on the top of the head, and marks on the hands and the feet, and the long ears, as Margaret points out, and so on. That's right. That's right. All of those bodily signs. So Subhuti replies with an answer that demonstrates his understanding of emptiness. And he was said to be one of the foremost in the understanding of emptiness. Okay? So he says, the Tathagata cannot be seen by the possession of attributes. Right? What the Tathagata says is the possession of attributes is no possession of attributes. So what does that sentence mean? It means two things, actually, right? So one part that it means is there's no one who possesses anything from the standpoint of the absolute, right? The Buddha doesn't possess anything. Those are just the things, those are just the conditions that are present on his body. And that's the other part of no possession of attributes. So no possession of attributes also means a mark. So let's use that word for a second. This is going back to, again, this way that we were saying about seeing merit as some kind of special thing. So seeing a mark as a special particular condition is a false view from the standpoint of the absolute. It's just the way his body is. It's a result of the conditions as they manifest. And it doesn't make him a Buddha. Having an Ushnisha and having long ears and having, long arms and all these other things that he had is not what makes him a Buddha. Right?
Yeah.
So Subhuti is affirming that. Subhuti is affirming that understanding.
Yeah.
Right? And then the Buddha goes and takes it the next step. And this is why many of the commentators say that the 5th chapter really sums up the bulk of the teaching of this sutra. The first 5, if you understand the first 5 chapters, then you will understand the rest of the sutra. So then the Buddha takes it the next step, and the Buddha is talking about the emptiness of emptiness. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to put the sutra up on the screen for you, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the language here, all right? So let's see if I can get it up on the screen. All right, can everybody see that? Can I get a yes or no?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I'm still on chapter 3. Let me scroll up here. Okay, chapter 5.
There it is. Yeah.
There it is. Okay, good. And no, that's not what I wanted.
Wherever there is possession of marks, there is fraud.
Well, there's that. I want to try. I want to stick with the Pine version for a second. Okay, so let me. I'm gonna get a pen here. Okay, good. So the Buddha told the Venerable Subhuti, since the possession of attributes is an illusion, no possession of attributes is no illusion. Right? So there's no one that possesses, and there are no special marks that create awakened nature. Awakened nature is part of the fundamental strata of existence, if you will. So the possession of attributes is an illusion, so no possession of attributes is no illusion. It means to understand correctly, right? That there's no possession of marks. By means of attributes that are no attributes, the Tathagata can indeed be seen. So this is where we need to do a little translating. So no attributes means mere conditions, okay? So we'll take this we'll take this here and see if we highlight this. Does that make it easier to see?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No attributes.
So no attributes means mere conditions. Things at the atomic level, right? So by means of seeing attributes or marks as mere conditions, then the suchness, the awakened nature, Tathagata, can indeed be seen.
Right.
Right? It's very straightforward. If we see marks as no marks, and no marks simply means we see them at the level of grains of sand, then Tathagata, awakened nature, and the Buddha himself, the Buddha's teaching, the Buddha as Dharmakaya, right, can indeed be seen. So the Zen way of relating to this, and Pine pointed it out actually in his commentary, is first there is a mountain, then there is no mountain, then there is a mountain, right? So the first mountain is our idea about it.
The time. Yeah.
Our idea about it. It's a concept. It's we look at a mountain and we have some kind of idea. Oh, it's this big, solid obstruction. Boom. That's the idea of mountain. And then there is no mountain, meaning then we learn that it's not solid actually. It's a fluctuating set of molecules and things are always falling off the mountain, and the mountain relates to sky and to gravity and to all these other things, right? So we learn that there is no mountain, the emptiness of mountain. And when we can take the next step beyond emptiness of mountain, then mountain becomes mountain again. It becomes just what it is, right? It's a big pile of dirt. And we relate to it as just the thing itself.
Right.
So this is to say that, to sum it up here, when you can see the specific state of the world as a temporary appearance of a specific sort, like mountain is a temporary state of a specific sort, then that is the correct view. That is the suchness of things, right? So not to get caught up in them as permanent, not to get caught up in them as special signs, marks, etc., but to actually see them for what they are, to see them in their suchness. That is to see awakened nature, to see them as the mere activity, the mere conditions in this instant. That is the correct view. So it's a teaching of absolute and relative as inseparable. You see that?
Yeah.
So we're going from saying, okay, first there's the relative view, then there's the view of emptiness and absolute, and then the inseparability of the two.
Yeah.
Well, good, because it would be pretty hard to function if we didn't have some of that relative, because you'd never be able to get through your day.
Right, you can't be a bodhisattva unless you can somehow relate to beings, however temporary they may be, right?
Right. Exactly.
But you always have to relate with this understanding as your framework, or you're coming from this understanding. That's how you relate.
Yes, that they're not separate from you, that they are not as solid and permanent and independent as they seem.
Right. And that they're manifesting through conditions.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mhm.
that it's, and to me, it then lends itself to the notion of codependent arising, right?
Yes,
That we're all
right.
arising. Yeah.
Definitely.
So it's like constantly flicking your focus this back and forth, between the two. So you see them as you see the absolute and you see the relative. You just go back and forth in order to function.
Maybe.
Can I add something? No, that's where your zazen comes in, because the zazen
Right.
gets you into the understanding. You don't have to read your notes anymore like I'm reading my notes. You know that there's no separation, and you know the concepts are conditioning, and so you begin to start to live the zazen experience. Now,
Well, I would say, Cynthia, if you look at the koans are hundreds of examples of how to relate without flipping back and forth. Most of
okay,
us do
right.
flip back and forth.
Yeah.
But the koans are pointing at a way of relating to the world without the flipping.
Okay, good point. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, all right.
And that's why there are hundreds of them, Ellen, because, each one of us is hooked by different aspects of our subjective view. And so the koan kind of shows you where you're hooked.
A quick question about the terms you're using. Mere, I've heard you say mere multiple times. Are you meaning M-E-R-E? Like,
Yes,
okay.
yes, that's right. Yeah, and I could say a lot more, and we only have a little bit of time, but I could say a lot more about Nagarjuna's logic about how we get to this view of not landing on existing or non-existing. And he went through this very lovely, very long treatise, which is summed up it's summed up quite well, in case you want to do some more reading, in this book called Son of Wisdom, which is by a Tibetan teacher, but he walks through quite well. Actually, on pages 6 and 7, he walks through in a fair amount of detail why it is that this logically makes sense, that things cannot arise from themselves, they cannot arise from something different from themselves, they cannot both arise from themselves and something different from themselves, or neither.
Yeah.
Was there more question there, Mark, other than the mirror?
No, I just wanted to be certain I was using the right word in my head.
Okay.
Listen.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes, you're welcome. Okay, so with the last couple of minutes that we have left, so I just want to say a couple of words about the three bodies of Buddha, because Pine talks a lot in his comments about bodies of Buddha, and we're going to talk a little bit more about bodies of merit pretty soon in the sutra. So, as I said a moment ago, this is when we talk about Tathagata. In the sutra, we're talking about Dharmakaya. So the three bodies of Buddha are the Dharmakaya, the Sambhogakaya, and the Nirmanakaya, right? So Shakyamuni Buddha was understood to be the Nirmanakaya, meaning the actual material, physical, temporary appearance of awakened nature in this particular realm, human realm. And the Sambhogakaya is sometimes translated as the bliss body. And it has to do with awakened nature, you could say with the enjoyment of enlightenment. So the Buddhas have the enjoyment of enlightenment, and part of the enjoyment of enlightenment is that they get to temporarily come and be the Buddha in the world. So the bliss body relates to how the Nirmanakaya shows up. And then the Dharmakaya, which is the one that I think is actually easier for most folks to relate to, is Dharmakaya is awakened nature in and of itself. It's the absolute, the complete, absolute essence, if you will. Buddha as essence of awakening, which is inherent, right? So when Dogen says it this way, Dogen says, all beings are fully endowed with enlightenment, and yet is not realized without practice, right? So to be fully endowed with enlightenment means we understand enlightenment as this kind of absolute integration, absolute harmony with all things. That is our natural state. We cannot be other than that as physical beings, as mental beings. We cannot be other than that. So that's the enlightenment aspect. And the practice aspect is to realize it, to bring it forth in the world in such a way that we can experience it, see it, talk about it, feel it in our bones. So the Dharmakaya would be is the enlightenment piece, right? Dharmakaya is this kind of inherentness of awakening. So that is what we should think about as we're continuing through the sutra. When it talks about Tathagata, it's talking not just about Shakyamuni Buddha, it's talking about Dharmakaya, right? And to the extent that the Bodhisattva is offering a teaching to beings about the emptiness of emptiness, then the Bodhisattva is, as I said, the tool or the instrument, the manifestation of that Dharmakaya. The Bodhisattva becomes the Nirmanakaya. So that's why the merit of the Bodhisattva, and actually the Bodhisattva's body themselves, their merit body, but actually their true body, is what the sutra later says, the true body of the Bodhisattva is inconceivably vast, right? Inconceivably vast. Like Dogen saying, it's mountains, it's rivers, it's stars, it's moon, it's sun, right? All of those things. So I'm trying to draw the parallels for us between these old Mahayana teachings and the Zen and Dogen's versions of language, yeah?
Yeah, good
So that
job.
as we're going through and we're reading, we're recognizing some of this kind of teaching, these threads.
And Dogen's words were, all beings are fully embodied with enlightenment and do not realize it.
Fully endowed with enlightenment. But without practice, it is not realized. So realized in the sense of both to become conscious of it, and realized in the sense of it shows up in the world, right? So I think I used in one of the previous classes the example of sutra copying. When you copy out a sutra, you bring a sutra into existence in the world. It becomes realized. So that's how our practice is realizing the Dharma, like that.
Oh, so when he refers to practice, he's not talking about shikantaza?
No, he's talking about something much greater than that. He's talking about a much broader thing. In fact, I wanted to quote, it's good, I'm glad that you said that. Okay, I know that we're at our time, guys, and just give me 2 more minutes here. I had one quote that I wanted to share with you from him. So, about the topic of merit, Dogen says in Jiju Sammai, in Self-Fulfilling Samadhi, he says, from the first time you meet a master, without engaging in incense offering, bowing, chanting Buddha's name, repentance, or reading scriptures, all the merit making, the traditional merit making activities, you should just wholeheartedly sit and thus drop away body and mind.
Yeah.
So later on, Dogen also goes to the subjective side, and in other fascicles, he heavily emphasizes the need for all of those practices and creation of merit. But in this particular case, in Jiju Samai, he's saying specifically, merit-making activities don't really mean anything outside of the context of dropping body and mind, or outside of the context of understanding the inseparability of all things.
Yeah.
So I'll leave you with one last quote also about how to practice with this section, which was a comment by an old master on chapter 4, who says, "View things as you would in a mirror. When things appear, reflect them, and when things disappear, let them go."
Is that in the pine, the red pine? Is that one of the translations red pine gives you?
That's
For
one of the
section-
comments. Yes.
And it's in section 4, did you say?
Yes.
I'll
Yes.
look it up. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's a good one.
So this meeting is about to disappear. May the merit benefit all beings.
No kidding.
All right.
Yay.
Until next week,
Thank you.
may you all be well.
Mhm.